Tonight on Politicat, a whole lot of hearings. The impeachment process continues.
And forming governments, checking in with coalitions in Israel and the UK.
Plus, understanding the Uyghurs, we take a deep dive into the conflict in China.
All that and more tonight on Politicat.
It's your politics right now. Good evening and welcome to Politicat. I'm Joey Safchik.
And I'm Justin Sweet with lots to get to tonight, so let's jump right in. California suffered two mass shootings this past week. The first was at a high school in Santa Clarita on Thursday. Two teenagers were killed before the 16-year-old gunman turned the weapon on himself. 3 more students were injured, and the LA Times reported today that the last of them has been released from the hospital. Further north in Fresno, police say 2 gunmen killed 4 people and injured 6 others attending a football watch party. Police said it was not a random shooting and have yet to rule out whether it was gang-related.
The U.S. Senate unanimously passed a bill in support of Hong Kong today. The measure also warns China about violent retaliation against the Hong Kong protesters. Meanwhile, President Trump and his administration are working to create a trade deal with China. The president has not yet openly supported the protesters, who have been out in the streets for more than 5 months.
The New York Times reports this week that indigenous people in Bolivia say backlash against them has begun. This comes after the nation's first indigenous president was forced out of office. Since then, a right-wing opposition senator has declared herself president and has made derogatory comments about indigenous people on Twitter in the past. This week, unrest continued in Bolivia as police shot tear gas at supporters of former President Evo Morales.
On Friday, Republican political consultant Roger Stone was found guilty in relation to the House investigation into Russian election interference. Stone is convicted of lying to investigators, obstructing the probe, and witness tampering. He's not yet been sentenced. President Trump has faced some pressure from the right to issue a pardon, but has not announced any plans of doing so. And week 2 of televised impeachment hearings continued today. Last week, House Democrats began the public inquiry phase of the impeachment proceedings with hearings of 3 top diplomats. Today, the House Intelligence Committee heard from 4 more witnesses. Democrats, including Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, have also started floating the term bribery as possible grounds for impeachment. This is in contrast to the term quid pro quo, which has been used up until this point.
Trump has reacted strongly to the proceedings on Twitter, using the platform to criticize witnesses on the stand. His tweet about one witness was read aloud to her during her hearing by Adam Schiff, chair of the House Intelligence Committee, who condemned it as witness intimidation. There's definitely a lot going on here, so we'd like to welcome in our panel. We have Cameron Peters of the NU College Democrats and Linus Hoeller, a Northwestern International first year. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So let's jump right in. There's been a lot going on in Washington. How does what we've seen over the past week change what we're going to see moving forward?
Well, we're finally seeing public hearings, and I think they're making a really powerful, really compelling case for why what the president did was wrong and why impeachment is the proper remedy. Obviously, we've been having closed-door hearings for a while now, but I think there's a difference in seeing it live. More people are going to be watching, and I think that's going to make an impact. We're going to see poll numbers start to move on impeachment. And we'll see when we get a vote, but it's a big deal.
I am completely in agreement with that. I believe the Democrats, their issue at the beginning for a long time was that they did not have a decisive course against Trump. Some of them were floating the idea of impeachment, some of them were like, no, we have to step back. Now they seem to slowly be coming together around one central idea, and I think that's going to help them in the numbers.
So how has President Trump's behavior been helping or hurting himself? We've seen the tweets, we've seen statements. What's he doing with that?
Well, it's difficult to say because most people are in a certain bubble, and I would include myself in that. I'm by no means a political expert. I believe for now he still enjoys a lot of support from his base. But that might move in the future because now it's televised, now it's on national TV. People are going to see it whether they like it or not. The question is, how can the Democrats get the people on the camera to say things that will get through?
Yeah, I think that's spot on from Linus. His base probably isn't moving. He has a 30% that's just unpersuadable. but hopefully these are going to have the desired effect for Democrats. They're going to start moving the 10-20% that make up the rest of his 45-ish% approval rating. That's going to start moving them into the pro-impeachment column. That'll probably have impacts both in the immediate time being and looking forward in 2020. That's obviously what Democrats are hoping. There is a political element to this in addition to kind of the moral necessity argument that some Democrats have been making, that because he's committed these really egregious acts, impeachment is the only possible remedy. But I think other than that, everything you said was exactly spot on. They've all come together behind one course now, and I think this is going almost as well as it could for Democrats, politically speaking.
So Cameron, let's talk a little bit more about Trump's role in this so far. It seems like he's been commenting from the sidelines. Is there any benefit to him actually testifying?
I'm
How about this?
Yeah.
Is there a chance at all that he testifies?
No, he won't testify. He loves to say that he's thinking about it and he gets a media cycle out of it. But there is absolutely no way he will subject himself to questioning, put himself in the witness chair, kind of at the mercy of Adam Schiff, who has been running the impeachment process. All but impossible. As to whether it would be a good thing or a bad thing, I personally think that would be beneficial to Democrats because he has proven to go a little bit off script, especially when he's angry or under pressure, which he obviously would be in the situation. But I don't think it's especially worth considering, because I'd say it's almost certain he won't ever make it out of the White House and up to Capitol Hill.
What do you think, Linus?
Yeah, I think it's close to impossible that Trump will testify. If he does, then it would almost certainly benefit Democrats. He knows that. He's not going to do it.
Do you think his actions on Twitter right now are helping him or hurting him, either in the Republican base or the Democrats?
One would think it would hurt him, but if we look at what he's tweeted out over the last years, anything he says really goes without much of a response. His supporters are going to continue supporting him for different reasons than the tweets. So if there's something egregious in a tweet, they'll be like, okay, this is why we love Trump, because he's not like the mainstream politicians. He speaks differently, he speaks his mind. Twitter is not the main, I would dare to say, not the main thing that affects the public opinion on the president. It's going to be the long-term reporting, even if the media is often decried as fake news media by some Trump supporters. I think it's going to be the long-term reporting that's going to really change it.
Well, two things I want to get into there. First of all, what is, I guess, the short-term effect of public opinion on these proceedings?
On the proceedings of the impeachment, I don't think that public opinion will have much of an impact, because really it is supposed to be sort of above that. And it is conducted in a way that it has to really fight for its legitimization, especially with the attacks from the Republican side that said that it was a hoax or that it's not a legitimized investigation. They have to be really careful with the way that they do it.
Do you think public opinion and social media, especially with the way the president uses it, is going to impact what we're seeing on Capitol Hill?
Yeah, I mean, particularly in terms of the president's tweet on Friday, that Schiff characterized as witness intimidation against Masha Yovanovitch, the former Ukraine ambassador. I think that it won't have a big effect, but around the margins it does matter. She was a very compelling witness. She admitted that the president had the right to choose the ambassador that he wanted, but I think the really emotional part of her testimony, she was asking, why did he have to smear me to remove me? And I think that witness intimidation made her look even more sympathetic and didn't look great for the president. In terms of public opinion, I don't think it matters much for the Democrats. I think they're firmly behind impeachment now. Obviously, good polling is good for them, but they've settled on a course of action, and that's the direction they're moving in. I think the big impact of polling at this point will be in terms of the more moderate or more in danger Republicans. None of them are showing much disposition to vote for conviction and removal at this point, except possibly Romney. But you have to think Tom Tillis, Susan Collins, Cory Gardner, some of those Republicans who are up in purple states are going to have to be thinking really hard about how they want to vote.
And Linus, I want to turn to you really quickly before we go to break. This is our last show of the quarter, so we won't be discussing the issue again until January. What do you expect to happen between now and then?
If only anybody knew. a lot can happen, or it just can stay where it is right now. There's been almost no movement for so long. There could be so much happening in the next few weeks.
And going off that, this is being streamed into people's homes for long periods of time. Many days now we've seen this. What impact do you think that's going to have in the way the media is covering it?
Yeah, I think it's, so the criticism after the first round of hearings was they lacked pizzazz, they weren't exciting enough. I think that's changing. Masha Jovanovic on Friday had a little more, I hate to use the theater critic language, but it was a more exciting hearing. We're going to hear from Gordon Sondland later this week. He has first-person testimony, so I think hearing from multiple witnesses over multiple weeks, it's just going to make things look worse and worse for the president and for Republicans.
All right, we could keep talking about this forever, but we're going to have to leave it there. We'll be right back with more Politicat.
At Northwestern, we're wildcats in every way.
Northwestern, break right through that. With our colors flying, we will cheer you all the go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
At Northwestern University, we are pioneering innovation and achieving excellence across every imaginable discipline. At Northwestern University, the possibilities are endless.
Within the past few years, hundreds of thousands of Muslim minorities in China have been forced into detention camps. And this past week, the New York Times released a report with leaked documents that detail said detention. Here to take a deeper dive into the story is Politicat correspondent Megan Leibowitz.
Thanks, Joey. And that's right. This past week's document leak gives the world a closer look at the detention centers, which is significant because the Chinese government tries clamping down on all information about the camps, and journalists' rights in China are extremely limited. So let's take a closer look at the context of the camps. The Chinese government has described the detention centers holding Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and others as job training centers that aim to counter Islamic terrorism. But in reality, the goal appears to be forced loyalty to the Chinese government. The camps have been in the works for several years. According to the New York Times, after an attack in China in 2014 by Uyghur militants, China's President Xi Jinping's speeches appeared to foreshadow the detention centers, and in 2016, the network of camps expanded when Chen Chuangguo was appointed to oversee the camps more directly. The New York Times reported Chuangguo said, quote, "round up everyone who should be rounded up." So what's the U.S. saying about this? Recently, the Trump administration has been largely quiet, but in October, the administration banned U.S. companies from doing business with certain Chinese companies that allegedly played a role in the surveillance or detention of Muslims. Also in October, the U.S. put restrictions on visas for Chinese officials accused of having a role in the detention centers. The detention centers have also come up briefly in speeches by members of the Trump administration, but the jury's still out on if the U.S. will offer stronger condemnation of the Chinese government after the new leak.
Coalition building is being tested in Israel and the United Kingdom. In Israel, Blue and White Party leader Benny Gantz has to form a coalition government by tomorrow. Otherwise, another election might be triggered. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom is heading into a December election in wake of Brexit negotiations breaking down. Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party is seeking to replace the minority government of Boris Johnson's Tory party. If neither Labour nor the Tories can win a majority government, a new coalition will need to be formed, adding yet another complication to the still ongoing Brexit negotiations. Governments in Europe and around the world have used the parliamentary system for centuries. In these systems, when the largest party can't gain a majority of its own, it will ideally form a coalition with smaller parties. And to discuss this further, we'd like to welcome back in our panel. Now, Linus, you are from Austria, which has a government run by parliamentary coalitions. How have you seen this structure play out recently?
Well, this year is very interesting for the parliamentary system in Austria. We had the first ever removal of a chancellor by a vote of non-confidence in the Austrian Second Republic, so post-World War II. And then the entire governing coalition fell apart. We had a coalition of the far right and the right until this July, which now is no longer. Now we have an interim government, which wasn't actually democratically elected, and we had recent elections, so now coalition building is happening. One of the parties, the strongest party, is the right-wing party, not the far right, but the center-right. That was also in the previous coalition, but the former coalition partner will not be in a coalition with them again because it fell apart. So compared to the US, there's a lot more to follow in that regard, but I believe that it's actually a better fit, at least for Austria, because there's so many different interest groups and such a broad political spectrum. And even if a party isn't strong on a national level, it can still gain considerable traction on a local level. For example, the Communist Party of Austria, which is obviously a minor party on the national level, usually scores around 1.8% or something like that, is one of the largest parties in the second largest city of the country, routinely scoring 20% or higher of the vote, even though it's the same people voting.
So turning to Israel, where this has been a big talking point since April, how do the dynamics of that country, religious secular divides, ethnic divisions, linguistic divisions, factor into this, and how do they make forming a government more difficult?
Well, first and foremost, Israel's parliamentary system is especially troublesome to form a government in. They use a party list system rather than having particular candidates stand for particular districts. And they have a 3.25% threshold. A party has to get more than 3.25% of the vote to have a chance at seating members in the Knesset, which is their parliament. I think I'm pronouncing that right.
Knesset.
Knesset. So that's problematic from the get-go. Additionally, both Benny Gantz and Benjamin Netanyahu have run up against the Israeli far right. I think Netanyahu's coalition in particular has had trouble. He represents a right-leaning party, Likud, but the further right, the Orthodox Jews in Israel, they want to, as I understand it, they don't want mandatory military service to extend to their the Orthodox Jewish groups. Currently, it extends to everyone. Gantz doesn't want to concede on that because that makes the rest of Israel that is still subject to mandatory military service unhappy, but he needs them to form a coalition, so that has been a challenge for him. Gantz has a similar challenge because he needs to get support from a whole bunch of parties that are possibly more Likud leaning, but that hasn't panned out, so who knows what's going to happen, but it's not looking especially great.
All right, I'll jump right in here, Linus. Over in the UK, given the current political dynamics, are we going to see any real Brexit action soon?
Brexit was supposed to happen a long while ago. Brexit still hasn't happened. The UK is still in the EU and will stay in the EU until at least 2020. Real Brexit action is a difficult term because there is constant Brexit action, there's constant negotiations, there are constant talks about elections, constantly changing majorities in the House of Commons. Will there be real Brexit action? Well, they had a deal more or less negotiated. It's just a question of when they will actually pull through and pass the actual legislation necessary for it.
Cameron, Brexit?
Well, yeah, so the UK is kind of engaged in a game of transatlantic one-upmanship with US politics right now. Obviously, things, as Linus said, are pretty chaotic. I do think the upcoming December 12th general election will be something of a referendum on Brexit. So the Lib Dems and the Labour Party have made their stance rather clear. They're against the harder Brexit favored by the Tories and Boris Johnson's party. So I suspect we'll see the vote break along the lines of the British people's preference on that question. And we'll see some, hopefully, one way or another, some real action rather than the stalemate after that election going into 2020.
And Linus, you've lived in a consensus government for most of your life. What do you think people who aren't as familiar with that system need to know, since they're seeing all of these headlines from around the world?
Well, I mean, the headlines aren't generated really by the consensus system. If you look at the US, there's more than enough headlines from the US, and that's a very different system. I actually lived, for most of my life, I lived in Germany, and you probably have not heard that many headlines about the parliamentary system in Germany not working out that well. Even though last year there was after the last election, there was a period of, I believe, over a year where they were searching for a coalition. But in the end, it leads to governments that are pretty solid, that have genuine support from the majority of people, because that's how they got their votes, and that really represent the people better and are able to pass laws that have a sort of a compromise aspect to them, rather than one party passing their legislation upsetting the entire other half of the population.
All right, thanks so much, Linus. We'll be back in a minute with more Politicat.
At Northwestern, we're wildcats in every way.
Northwestern, break right through that. With our colors flying, we will cheer you all the go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
With an update on what's new with the Green New Deal, we turn it over to Justin for this week's Money Minute.
Thanks, Joey. With so much attention on 2020, it's easy for things as simple as policy proposals to get lost in the headlines. Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez changed that last Thursday. The Vermont senator and New York representative introduced the Green New Deal for Public Housing Act. This bill would cost $172 billion over 10 years, and it aims to make the nation's 1.2 million public housing units more eco-friendly with a greater emphasis on renewable energy. Some Republicans have been quick to dispute the Democrats' cost projection, arguing that it would in fact cost between $1.6 and $4.2 trillion. But sticking to their own estimations, Sanders and AOC argue the bill would essentially pay for itself, reducing energy expenses by 70%, good for $613 million in savings per year, and public housing costs by 30%, good for $97 million a year. In addition, they say the bill would create around 250,000 jobs. Plus, the reduction in carbon emissions would be equivalent to removing 1.2 million cars from the road over 10 years. And with Bernie taking to the Democratic debate stage tomorrow night, it'll be interesting to see if his bold policy proposal gets some attention. Joey?
Thanks, Justin. We know the news can be a little overwhelming, so we're here to catch you up with our segment, News You Didn't Know. An American who is suspected of fighting with ISIS has been deported to the United States. The man spent 5 days in a no-man's land between Greece and Turkey before being put on a plane to the U.S. This week marks the start of Turkey's long-promised operation to send captured ISIS fighters back to their home countries. But the process of sending ISIS fighters home isn't always smooth, as several Western states have stripped ISIS fighters and collaborators of their citizenship.
Former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick has been without work for 3 years after famously kneeling during the national anthem and starting a movement in the process. This past weekend, he stepped back onto the field in a workout for NFL GMs and scouts. The venue was changed at the last minute so the media could attend, according to a statement. At least 7 NFL teams were present at the workout, and the NFL says all 32 teams will receive video footage.
It's been 1 year since the Yellow Vest demonstrators first took to the streets of France. The movement's anniversary was met with fires and tear gas and significantly fewer protesters than last year. About 30,000 people demonstrated over the weekend, as opposed to the hundreds of thousands who turned out last November, according to the New York Times. Analysts say the Yellow Vests eroded from within, lacking strong leadership and a long-term plan. French President Macron also released France's toughest anti-riot police on the protesters earlier this year.
Life imitating art, 2 real-life chemistry professors are taking a page out of Breaking Bad's script. They were arrested for allegedly making meth. The associate professors of chemistry at Henderson State University in Arkansas are in custody, charged with manufacturing meth and using drug paraphernalia. Both men have been on administrative leave since October. And we'll be back after this break with our game, Headlines.
At Northwestern, we're Wildcats in every way.
Go Northwestern, break right through that. With our colors flying, we will cheer you all the go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
And now to end our show on a fun note, we're bringing our guest back for this week's edition of Headlines. I'm going to read the headlines. 2 are false, 1 is real. You'll have to guess which one is true. Ready?
Let's go.
Okay. Option 1, a comedy group put a fake book jacket on Donald Trump Jr.'s book that changed the title to, quote, "Is this enough, Dad? Please tell me yes." Option 2, this week Tucker Carlson brought Roger Stone's daughter onto his show to appeal for a presidential pardon. Option 3, Senator Lindsey Graham suggested holding the Senate impeachment vote now because we, quote, know what the result will be, let's just get it over with.
I think the third headline about Lindsey Graham was the true one.
I don't want it to be true, but I am going to have to go with the second one.
Tucker Carlson?
Yeah.
Tucker Carlson is true. Very nice. Rookie.
1 for 1.
Doing great.
He's undefeated in
That
his
one will be way too boring.
Yeah.
career.
There's no bottom for
It
Lindsey
always
Graham,
has to be
so
a more outlandish one than
Yeah.
that. But the first one, just so you know, is almost true. We just made the title up.
All right, Cameron, you've got some chance at redemption here for
okay.
round number 2 of Headlines. Option 1. South Dakota's governor defended his state's new anti-methamphetamine slogan this week, which read, quote, "Meth, we're on it." Option 2, this week Jeff Bezos called Elon Musk the Donald Trump of tech, as he, quote, "can say anything and people will just brush it off." And our third option is in response to a question on clean energy, Andrew Yang announced that if elected, he will put solar panels on the roof and lawn of the White House. Cameron.
Well, I could absolutely believe all 3 of those. I think it is the first one with South Dakota.
South Dakota. All right, Linus.
I'm inclined to go with the Elon Musk one, but I think I'm going to have to go with the first one as well.
You are correct. Linus 2 for 2.
Very good at
2
this
for 2
game.
in his first
Natural.
appearance on Politicat.
Congratulations.
The
You're
first
always
Pride
pretty good.
Headlines.
You always do decent.
Decently.
Very nice.
My
very
Twitter
nice.
addiction. It
But
helps.
you legitimately knew the second round.
Yes.
You
Yep.
did
We're
know.
always very
So
impressed.
you
Twitter
wasn't
had
a
a field day
guess.
with
It
that
wasn't a
one.
guess.
It wasn't
It
a
was
guess.
an I know this one.
It was.
So we can consider it a tie, maybe.
I don't know.
I concede the victory.
Rules are rules.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for playing
Absolutely.
along with
Thanks
us.
for having us.
That's all the time we have for tonight. This is our last show of the quarter. Justin and I won't be back on this desk for a year.
It's going to be a long time. September 2020. A lot will be different.
A lot will be different. We'll be seniors.
Yeah.
We'll be the old guys.
Politicat will still be on next quarter. I'll be holding down the fort here in Evanston. You'll be in D.C.
So it's going to be Politicat galore. We're on the
Politicat
ground.
across the country.
Love it. Love it.
Sounds
I'll be
good
in the
to me.
DC bureau. Very excited.
All right, well,
I'll
that's all
miss
the
you, though.
time we have for tonight. We'll be back next quarter with more Politicat. I'm Justin Sweetwood.
And I'm Joey Safchick. Not going to cry. Good night.